All right, diving in today, you guys sent in this online chat about, well, the meaning of life. And it all started with, get this, a kid asking about religion.
Oh, wow.
It's really something. We've got kids in here, like, straight up asking, does life even have a meaning? Then they're comparing notes with the adults.
Yeah, that's a big one to tackle.
It is. And then there's this Monkey King thing thrown in. It's just too good to pass up.
Sounds like a mix of, that childhood wonder and some deep, deep thoughts.
Exactly. So today, let's unpack these different takes on life's meaning, see how it ties into religion, and hopefully, find some insights for you along the way.
Looks like we've got our work cut out for us. That chat's got quite the range of
Hey,
opinions.
doesn't it? You've got some kids saying, like, life's pointless, we all just die anyway. Pretty
Right.
bleak stuff, right? Straight up nihilism.
They can't get much bleaker than that.
But then others are like, nope, meaning's just living, experiencing things. And some even say the search FRR meaning, IS the meaning. It's like a little sampler platter of all the ways people think about this.
What strikes me is this really reflects, what a lot of people, especially young folks, are grappling with these days. This generation, without those traditional religious structures maybe their parents had, they're really wrestling with making meaning in a world that feels, well, kind of chaotic.
Makes you realize, before we even get into those specific viewpoints, maybe we should define meaning itself,
Oh, absolutely.
The source material even suggested that, like, we got to be on the same page.
If we're not even talking about the same thing, we're just going to, talk past each other.
Exactly.
The definition they give is interesting. Meaning as the possibility of understanding. So not like one right answer, but can human existence even be understood?
Okay, I like that. So it's more about, does our life fit into some kind of framework that makes sense?
Exactly. And this leads us to some pretty big questions about, what are the limits of our human reasoning? And does faith have a role in all this?
Right.
The source material argues, humans, unlike animals, we're very aware of our own existence, A and D, that we're going to die someday. Heavy stuff.
It is. Makes you wonder, what's the point then?
And so if we're just using logic, what we can observe in the natural world, it might seem like, well, no inherent meaning.
Yeah.
And that might be why people with strong religious beliefs, they're not as bothered by these big existential questions. Religion offers a framework, answers about life, death, suffering, purpose. Things reason alone might struggle to provide.
It's like having a map, right? You don't got to wander around lost.
Right, exactly.
But the source also says religion takes a leap of faith, and not everyone's gonna or even can make that leap. It's a
A
choice.
very personal one.
Okay, got to bring up the Monkey King now. I think it's brilliant. So, for anyone who hasn't read it, this classic Chinese story, the Monkey King starts off living carefree, kind of like those kids in the chat, just live in the moment kind of
Just
thing.
enjoying himself.
Instant gratification, no big questions, no worries.
No existential angst.
But then it gets interesting. Monkey King gets obsessed with, like, immortality, transcendence, goes on this epic quest for knowledge, power.
Which you could say represents a much deeper search for meaning.
It's like he realizes there's got to be more to life than just peaches and monkeying around.
Right. He wants something to make his life significant, Beat death. Be more than just a monkey.
So for you listening, which one hits home? That carefree Monkey King at the start, or this quest for knowledge, understanding, even if it's tough? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Interesting question.
It is, and it leads to this idea of, like, stages of understanding life's meaning. The source mentions 3. First one's all about, like, immediate sensations, feelings,
Basic stuff.
which kind of goes back to those kids saying, just live for the moment, right?
Yeah, and in a way, it's a natural starting point. But as we mature, we usually move beyond just, pleasure and instant gratification. We start thinking about good and evil, the complex stuff of being human.
That's the second stage, right? Like, oh, life's not just a playground.
Exactly. Rules, consequences, lots we don't get.
And that's where things like classic literature, philosophy, art, all that intellectual stuff, it becomes important, right?
Absolutely. Exposes us to different ways of thinking, challenges our ideas, helps us make sense of it all.
It's like building your brain's toolkit.
Exactly.
And in our source, it's interesting to see the kids starting to ask these bigger questions. That they're clearly moving past that life is fun phase,
Yeah.
wrestling with these tougher ideas, like developing their own philosophy.
And that brings up a really important point. Parents in these conversations. The source, they emphasize how crucial it is to have open communication with kids about this stuff, even if we don't have all the answers.
Because let's be real, who does?
Exactly. But we can create that space where it's okay to explore these questions, openly and honestly.
Right, because avoiding these talks, that can actually backfire. The source said if kids don't feel comfortable coming to their parents, they might look for answers in the wrong places.
Oh, absolutely. And those sources, they might not be reliable or share our values.
So it's not about shielding them, but giving them the tools, the critical thinking skills to navigate this stuff themselves.
Empowering them to find their own view and meaning in a world that's, let's face it, pretty complex.
And you know what? We might even learn something ourselves along the way. This meaning making, it's a two-way street.
Oh, for sure. Creating that culture of intellectual curiosity within our families and, our communities.
And speaking of communities, we can't forget religion. It provides a framework for meaning for a lot of people. The source pointed out, those with strong religious beliefs, they might not be as caught up in these debates because they've already got their answers.
Right. But religion's not the only foul-why path to meaning. Some find comfort and purpose there, while others find it in philosophy, relationships, their creative passions.
Right, there's no one right answer.
Exactly.
The key is keep searching, keep asking, keep evolving. The meaning of life, it's not some fixed thing, it's something we keep discovering and redefining our whole lives.
Well said. Not a destination, but an ongoing journey of exploration, growth, connection.
So, wrapping up this part of our dive, what are your biggest takeaways? What's sticking with you from all this?
Maybe it's that renewed commitment to really talk with your loved ones, or being okay with uncertainty, seeing it as a chance to grow, or even just remembering to enjoy the ride, even when you don't know where you're headed.
Whatever it is, we hope this deep dive got you thinking in new ways, gave you some food for thought on your own search for meaning.
And remember that search itself, that's often where the real magic is. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing, all the wonderful complexity of being human.
So true. And on that note, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into this fascinating topic.
It's kind of wild how this source, takes these huge philosophical ideas and makes them, relatable to parenting.
Right. We're not just in the clouds here. It's about how this stuff plays out in our lives, especially with our kids.
And one thing that really hit me is helping our kids find meaning. Maybe that's even more important than, pushing for good grades or fitting into some mold.
It's a total shift, yeah.
It is. It is.
But how do you do that? It's easy to say help them find meaning, but what does that even look like day to day?
I think it starts with, remember how curious kids naturally are. Let them explore what gets them fired up. It's about that inner motivation, where learning, growing, that's the reward, not just getting a pat on the back.
So instead of get good grades, go to college, it's more like, what are you passionate about? What problems do you want to solve?
Exactly. And this goes for us grown-ups too, right? Are we chasing after approval, or are we doing what makes us, come alive?
Ooh, good question. Spending time on things that matter to us, even if nobody's giving us a gold star for it.
Right, right.
What about you listening? What brings you that fulfillment? Are you living it out?
It's a constant thing, this matching our values to what we actually do. But the source makes a good point about talking about it, even if we don't have the meaning of life all figured out.
Which, let's be honest.
Exactly. But just being able to talk about it with our kids, that makes it safe to explore.
Because none of us have it all figured out, right? Life's messy, unpredictable, lots of gray areas.
And that's okay. And by showing our kids that it's fine to ask these questions, to not be sure, that gives them the tools to figure it out themselves.
You're teaching them to think for themselves, not just swallow whatever they're told.
Absolutely.
Which reminds me of that point about, avoiding these meaning of life talks. The source said if kids don't feel comfortable coming to US, they might get answers from, well, not the best sources.
So true. And nowadays, there's so much bad info out there.
Oh, yeah.
It's crucial to make home a place where being curious is good, where they can say, I don't know, or what's the point? And it's okay.
And who knows, we might learn something too. Meaning making, it goes both ways.
Totally. It's about building that culture of using your brain, asking questions in our families and communities. It's funny how as adults, we can get so caught up in the daily grind that we forget to ask these big questions ourselves.
It's so easy to do. Work, family, just keeping up with everything.
But making time to just think, to reconnect with that curious part of us, that's important.
You're right. And those meaning of life talks, whether they're with our kids, friends, or even just in our own heads,
Yeah.
it reminds us that we're all in this together, trying to make sense of it all.
And even though it can be overwhelming sometimes, even kind of scary, there's beauty in it, in this shared search for meaning.
Absolutely. So if you're listening and feeling a bit lost, unsure about your own purpose, you are not alone. We all go through those times of questioning. It's part of being human.
And as you keep going on your own path, think about this. What if those times when you're not sure, those big questions, what if they're actually chances to grow and understand more?
Wow, that's a really cool way to look at it. Instead of being afraid of what we don't know,
Yeah.
what if it's like an invitation to explore, learn, become more ourselves? Maybe that's part of living a meaningful life.
Maybe it is. And this brings us back to something we talked about before, how important parents are when kids are trying to make sense of these big questions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's easy to feel like, as parents, we got to have all the answers, like give our kids this perfect map for life.
I know that feeling. But honestly, life's messy, unpredictable, and there are no easy answers to a lot of these questions.
And that's okay. Maybe the best thing we can do as parents is to show them that we're still curious too, that we're willing to wrestle with the tough stuff, even when we don't know the answer.
It's like giving them permission to do the same.
And as they do, we might find ourselves learning and growing right alongside them, rediscovering that sense of wonder.
It's a cool cycle, that back and forth between generations, supporting each other as we search for meaning and purpose.
And maybe in that shared journey, we start to see that the meaning of life isn't this thing we arrive at, but the journey itself, the seeking, the questioning, the connecting with something bigger.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's good to just pause and think about what we've talked about. We've explored all these different ideas about what it means to live a meaningful life, the importance of learning and exploring, and those powerful conversations we have with our kids and loved ones.
We've also touched on how searching for meaning and personal growth are connected and how this journey keeps going with all its ups and downs. And that's okay.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. We've gone from, Gen Z's online thoughts to ancient wisdom, even got some Monkey King inspiration in there.
Quite the journey. Yes.
It has been. We've talked about religion's role, how important personal growth is, and how crucial those talks with our kids can be. But now, in this last part, let's get practical. How do we actually live these ideas about meaning?
Right, because it's one thing to ponder big questions,
It is.
but how does that change our everyday choices, our relationship?
Exactly.
The source makes this point that really stuck with me. It's like helping our kids find meaning. Maybe that's even more important than, those straight A's or fitting into what society expects. Big shift in thinking.
Huge. But how do we actually do that? It's easy to say, but what's it look like in real life?
Well, I think it starts with remembering how naturally curious kids are and letting them explore, what lights them up.
Yeah.
It's that inner drive where learning, growing, that's the good stuff, not just someone saying, good job.
So instead of good grades, good college, it's more what gets you excited? What do you want to change in the world?
Exactly. And honestly, that applies to us grown-ups too. Are we chasing after praise, or are we doing what truly makes us, I don't know, feel alive?
Good question. Spending our time on things that matter to us, even if nobody's handing out trophies for it.
Right, right.
What about you listening? What brings you that feeling? Are you living it?
It's a constant work in progress, this matching up what we value with what we actually do. But the source makes a good point about communication, even if we don't have life figured out.
Which, let's be real.
Exactly. Just being able to talk about it with our kids, that creates a safe space to explore.
Because none of us have it all figured out, right? Life's messy, unpredictable, full of gray areas.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And by showing our kids that it's okay to ask these questions, to not be sure, that's what gives them the tools to figure it out themselves.
It's empowering them to think for themselves, not just believe everything they hear.
Absolutely.
Which reminds me of that part about avoiding these meaning of life conversations. Like the source said, if kids don't feel comfortable coming to US, they might get their answers from, well, not the best places.
And these days, there's a lot of bad information out there.
Oh, yeah.
It's more important than ever to make home a place where asking questions is good, where they can say, I don't know, or what's the point? And it's okay.
And who knows, maybe we learn something in the process. This meaning-making thing, it's not a one-way street.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's about creating a culture of, intellectual curiosity, not just in families, but in our communities, too.
Right, communities. And speaking of, we can't forget religion, right? It's a framework for meaning for a lot of people. The source mentioned how those with strong beliefs, they might not be as caught up in these debates because they've already got their answers, so to speak.
That's true. But it's also important to remember Religion's not the only way to find meaning.
Of course not.
Some people, it gives them comfort, purpose. Others find it in philosophy, their relationships, creative stuff. It's different for everyone.
No one size fits all.
Exactly.
The important thing is keep searching, keep asking those questions, and keep evolving. This whole meaning of life thing, it's not set in stone. It's something we keep discovering, redefining our whole lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's not a finish line, but this ongoing journey. Exploring, growing, connecting.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive, what are your biggest takeaways? What are you walking away with from this exploration of life's meaning?
Maybe it's that reminder to really talk with your loved ones, to be open. Or maybe it's being okay with not knowing everything, seeing it as a chance to grow. Or maybe it's just remembering to enjoy the ride, even when the destination's fuzzy.
Whatever it is, we hope this deep dive sparked some new ideas for you, gave you some food for thought as you continue your own search for meaning and purpose.
And remember, often the search itself, that's where the real magic is. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep embracing all the, well, the wonderful complexity of being human.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep those questions coming.